Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you could subscribe to my channel. It costs you nothing, but for me, it's a huge encouragement to keep bringing you real, spine-chilling stories like this. Eastwood Hills was the kind of town that looked like it had nothing to hide. Tucked between wooded trails and sparkling lakes, it was an upscale suburb where nothing ever seemed out of place. Rows of elegant homes with wide porches, private schools with waitlists, and streets so quiet you could hear the wind move through the trees. At the edge of Maple Hollow Drive, behind a slate-gray stone facade and an iron gate that creaked just slightly when it opened, lived the Harpers. Daniel Harper, 46, was the editor-in-chief of the Eastwood Gazette, the region's most respected newspaper. Known for his cool demeanor and piercing editorials, he was the type of man people listened to carefully and argued with cautiously. Always the calm in the storm, Daniel saw the world in black and white, headlines and deadlines. His wife, Emily Harper, 44, hadn't worked in years. She didn't need to. A former publishing assistant, she'd chosen instead to raise their children, manage the home, and pour her heart into the little details of daily life. Fresh flowers on the dining table. Birthday cakes from scratch. A spotless kitchen with handwritten recipes tucked into drawers. They had 2 children. Lily, 17, quiet, thoughtful, artistic, the kind of girl who watched more than she spoke. And Noah, 15, a whirlwind of energy, always in motion, always tapping something or cracking jokes at the dinner table. They were close, the kind of siblings who bickered constantly but had each other's backs without question. Completing the family was Walter Harper, Daniel's father. Once a history professor, now 78 and confined to his bed after a massive stroke nearly 2 years ago. He couldn't walk, could barely speak. But he was very much present, a silent fixture in the back bedroom, always watching, always listening. It was a beautiful home. A respected family. A life others might envy. It happened in December. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes the trees groan under the weight of fresh snow. Eastwood Hills was blanketed in white, roofs like frosting, driveways dusted in silence, and wind that howled through the eaves like a warning no one listened to. The Harpers had been invited to a wedding, Emily's cousin, out in Clearview Bay, 3 states away. It was a big event. A full family affair. Everyone was expected. But Walter couldn't travel. Not in his condition. And they couldn't leave him alone, not even for a day. So the plan was made. Daniel, Emily, and the kids would go. A short flight, a weekend away, and they'd be back by Sunday night. But as the trip neared, the guilt crept in. Emily began to worry. Walter had been having more restless nights lately. Murmuring in his sleep. His nurse had called in sick twice that month. And though they'd hired temporary help from a local agency, Emily didn't trust strangers with her father-in-law. Not really. 2 days before the trip, Emily pulled Daniel aside. "I'll stay," she said quietly, brushing crumbs off the kitchen counter. "You take the kids. I'll hold down the fort here." Daniel hesitated. "You sure?" She smiled. That same gentle, worn smile she always gave when she was tired but didn't want anyone to see it. "I'm sure." The morning of the flight was bitterly cold. The driveway was slick with a fresh layer of snow. Daniel loaded the luggage into the car while Lily and Noah shuffled in half asleep, bundled in thick coats and scarves. The taxi's engine puffed smoke into the gray morning as Emily stood at the door in her robe, waving goodbye. Daniel leaned in for a quick kiss, brushing her cheek. "We'll call you when we land." She nodded. "Don't worry about us." He smiled. She watched the car disappear down Maple Hollow Drive, red taillights blinking through the mist. And then she closed the door. That was the last time anyone outside the house saw Emily Harper alive. The wedding had been beautiful. Laughter filled the air. Strings of golden lights twinkled overhead as the couple danced their first dance. The scent of fresh roses mixed with the warm sweetness of cake and champagne. There were old friends to hug, cousins to catch up with, stories told over clinking glasses and endless rounds of food. Even Daniel, not usually one for crowds, had found himself laughing more than once. Lily danced with a cousin she hadn't seen in years. Noah ate 3 slices of cake and tried to sneak a 4th. For a while it felt like life had paused. Like everything back home, responsibilities, deadlines, wheelchairs, and bedpans all had faded into the background. But as the festivities wound down and guests began saying their goodbyes, a strange weight crept in. Maybe it was just the cold. The return flight had been delayed. Twice. By the time their plane landed, it was already well past midnight. The taxi ride from the airport to Eastwood Hills was quiet, the kids asleep against their seatbelts, Daniel staring out the window, watching the snow collect along the edges of the road. They pulled into Maple Hollow Drive just before 1 a.m. The houses they passed were glowing softly, porch lights on, a few windows lit up with TV flickers or the golden haze of reading lamps. But not theirs. The Harper house stood in complete darkness. No porch light. No hallway lamp glowing through the frosted glass. Even the driveway lights, which were always set to turn on at dusk, they too were off. Daniel leaned forward. "That's odd," he murmured to the driver. "We keep the lights on, always." The taxi rolled to a stop at the gate. The snow had begun to fall again, heavier now. Fat, slow flakes landing without a sound. Daniel stepped out first, pulling his coat tight, the cold biting through the fabric. He stared at the house. No light. No sound. Just the tall, dark silhouette of the home that had never once felt unfamiliar, until now. Something was wrong. He felt it in his chest. Daniel paid the driver while the kids shuffled out, groggy and cold. The wheels of the suitcase dragged through fresh snow as they moved toward the front steps. Their breath curled into the air like smoke, the only sound the crunch of boots on ice. The house loomed above them, dark, still, silent. Daniel climbed the porch and rang the doorbell. Twice. No answer. He frowned and tried again, pressing the button harder this time. Still nothing. He glanced back at the kids. Lily was hugging herself, her scarf pulled tight around her neck. Noah was yawning, blinking up at the windows. "Maybe she's asleep," Lily said softly. Daniel didn't respond. He reached for the handle. The door was unlocked. It swung open with a soft creak, just wide enough to reveal the narrow front hallway swallowed in darkness. No lights. No smell of dinner. No heat. He hesitated. Emily was careful, obsessively so. Doors were always locked. Lights were always on timers. She wouldn't have left the house like this, not even for a minute. "Stay here," Daniel muttered to the kids and stepped inside. The air was cold. Not just winter cold, wrong cold. Like the furnace had been off for hours. He flipped the hallway switch. He called out, "Emily?" His voice echoed too loudly in the stillness. Silence. "Dad." Noah called from behind him. "Is Grandpa okay?" Daniel's stomach tightened. No familiar murmur of the TV in Walter's room. No footsteps. No sound. "Emily?" he called again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when Lily whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Something's wrong." And Daniel knew. She was right. Daniel stepped deeper into the house, every footfall louder than the last. The living room came into view, and he froze. It was a disaster. Cushions slashed open, picture frames shattered on the floor, the coffee table overturned and broken into pieces. Books and glass lay scattered like debris from an explosion. The curtains were torn halfway down, swaying slightly in the draft from a cracked window. Emily would never have left it like this. Not in a million years. And then, his eyes landed on something worse. Their German shepherd. He lay crumpled near the fireplace, his fur matted with blood. Motionless. Lifeless. There were stab wounds across his side, deep, brutal, deliberate. A dark pool of blood had soaked into the rug beneath him. Daniel felt his chest clench. Max had been with them for 6 years. Protective. Loyal. Trained to bark if even a squirrel crossed the yard. He would have fought. He did fight. And someone killed him. Daniel stumbled back into the hallway. Lily and Noah were just behind him, trying to peer past his shoulder. "No," he said sharply, blocking their view. "Back outside. Now." "What? Why?" Lily asked, voice rising. "Just go. Please. Get out and wait by the car." The kids hesitated. Something in Daniel's voice, tight, shaken, unlike anything they'd heard from him before, made them obey. As they stepped back into the cold, Daniel reached for his phone. His fingers were shaking. He dialed the one number that came instinctively, Tom Bennett, their neighbor 2 doors down. Retired firefighter. Daniel's friend of 20 years. Trusted, steady, always the first one to show up when anything went wrong. The phone rang twice before Tom answered, voice thick with sleep. "Hello." "Tom," Daniel whispered, staring at Max's body. "I need you to come over. Something's happened." "Emily." Daniel's voice cracked as panic swallowed him whole. Without thinking, he dashed toward the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stopped cold. There she was, lying on the cold hardwood floor, unmoving. A dark, spreading pool of blood encircled her like a twisted halo. Emily Harper. Wife, mother. The woman who had waved goodbye just hours ago, now gone. Daniel's knees buckled. His vision blurred. The room spun. His breath hitched, ragged and shallow. The sharp scent of blood filled the air, making him reel. He wanted to call out, to scream, to do anything, but his voice caught somewhere deep inside, strangled by disbelief. And then, from the doorway came the sound of footsteps, Lily and Noah, their faces pale as sheets, their eyes wide with fear. They saw her, their mother. And suddenly, the air shattered with screams. Lily's voice cracked as she cried, "Mom!" "No!" Noah's sobs echoed through the house, raw and desperate. Daniel's own scream tore through the silence, a guttural, broken sound that carried the weight of everything lost. Moments later, the front door banged open. Tom Bennett came rushing in, flanked by his wife, Grace. The couple had been jolted awake by the ruckus and now stood frozen in the doorway, eyes wide with horror. Behind them, neighbors spilled onto the street, drawn by the screams and the chilling sense that something terrible had happened at the Harper home. Eastwood Hills had never known anything like this. By the time the sky began to pale into a cold gray dawn, the Harper residence was crawling with police. Flashing red and blue lights lit up Maple Hollow Drive, casting eerie reflections onto the snow-covered street. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the gate. Curious neighbors stood at a distance in hushed clusters, coats wrapped tight, faces pale. Inside, it was a different world altogether. The once beautiful Harper home had become a crime scene. Uniformed officers moved with urgency, marking evidence, photographing everything. Crime scene techs dusted surfaces, tagged blood stains, collected fibers. Forensics teams mapped out the scene with quiet precision, the soft clicks of cameras capturing shattered memories frozen in time. The living room was a mess. The master bedroom, a scene of horror. And the rest of the house told its own story. Cabinets yanked open. Drawers overturned. The bedroom safe broken into and emptied. Jewelry gone. Cash missing. Even Emily's laptop and phone had been taken. It wasn't subtle. Detectives quickly formed their initial theory: robbery gone wrong. Whoever had done this came prepared, knew where to look. The destruction was purposeful, targeted. The violence, maybe a reaction to being interrupted. But there were questions too. Why lock Walter's room from the outside? Why kill the dog? Why such brutal force, even after Emily was clearly overpowered? Detective Sarah Langford, from Eastwood County Homicide, took over the lead. Sharp-eyed, composed, and methodical, she stood at the center of it all, slowly absorbing the chaos. The hours blurred into each other. The coroner had taken Emily's body. Walter had been rushed to Eastwood General, still unconscious but stable. The kids were at the Bennett's home, wrapped in blankets, silent with shock. Daniel sat in the dining room, or what was left of it, his eyes hollow, hands still shaking, when Detective Sarah Langford approached with her notepad. She sat across from him. No uniform. No raised voice. Just calm, measured presence. "We've swept the entire house," she said quietly. "There's something you need to know." Daniel looked up. "There were no fingerprints," she continued. "No footprints. No gloves left behind. Not even a cigarette butt. Whoever did this, did it clean." Daniel blinked, trying to process. "So, nothing?" She shook her head. "Nothing. And the door?" Langford leaned forward slightly. "No signs of forced entry. No scratches. No tampering. Deadbolt wasn't broken. Which means one of two things: either the killer had a key, or someone let them in. Daniel's throat went dry. You think it was someone we knew? Langford didn't answer directly. Instead, she flipped a page in her notebook. The alarm system was disabled. The codes were never triggered. Whoever came in, came through the front door. Daniel sat back in his chair. He looked at the kitchen wall, at the family photos that still hung there untouched. Emily. The kids. Even Walter, in happier days. Someone had walked through that door. Someone who knew their dog. Someone who knew Emily would be home alone. And someone who had killed with precision and left without a trace. Not a stranger. Not a drifter. Someone familiar. Detective Sarah Langford sat across from Daniel once more, this time with more purpose in her eyes. We've ruled out robbery as a sole motive, she began. The jewelry could have been taken to stage it. But this, she paused, this was rage. Daniel nodded slowly, still dazed. I don't understand. We don't have enemies. Not personally. We keep to ourselves. Langford tilted her head. What about professionally? Anyone who might have a grudge against you because of your work. Daniel sighed, rubbing his eyes. I've written things that didn't sit well with people. But that comes with the job. You're the senior editor at the Eastwood Gazette. You've covered corruption. Scandals. I imagine that's made you some enemies. The pause. Then Daniel reluctantly nodded. There are a few. Names I still remember because of the backlash. Langford took out her pen. Let's hear them. Daniel took a breath. Martin Blake, ex-mayor of a nearby town. I exposed his misuse of disaster relief funds. He threatened to sue, but it never went anywhere. Cameron Wells, a pharmaceutical CEO. I ran a 3-part piece on their drug trials being manipulated. They lost millions. Ivy Monroe, he added after a pause. A socialite. Connected. I uncovered a charity scam she was running through her foundation. She called the office every day for a week. Langford scribbled each name down. Anyone else? No one I can think of with that kind of hatred. She nodded, rising from the chair. We'll look into them. That afternoon, the autopsy report came in. Langford reviewed it in silence, her jaw tightening with every line. Emily Harper. 14 stab wounds. The chest, arms. Defensive wounds on her hands. She had fought. Max, the family's loyal German shepherd? 8 stab wounds. Days turned into weeks. The flurry of sirens, flashing lights, and forensic teams gave way to silence, an unbearable, suffocating silence. Detectives followed every thread. Every name Daniel had given was investigated. Alibis checked. Backgrounds scoured. Surveillance footage reviewed from nearby homes, stores, gas stations. Nothing. Not one fingerprint. Not one camera. Not one mistake. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. The Harper household changed. Daniel returned to work at the Eastwood Ledger. His colleagues tried not to stare, tried not to walk on eggshells. But they did. He no longer stayed late. No more editorials. Just quiet, mechanical tasks. The man who once exposed fraud and firestorms was now speaking in half-sentences, eyes lost behind his glasses. At school, Noah barely spoke. He kept to himself. His grades slipped. Lily, once outgoing and fiery, stopped playing piano. Her laughter, once echoing down the halls, was gone. And Walter? He survived the blow to the head, but not the weight of it all. He hadn't spoken a full sentence since the night they brought him home from the hospital. He sat mostly in silence by the window, staring into the yard, his eyes unfocused. The house, once filled with warmth and conversation, had grown colder, quieter. Still, a family fractured. And still, no arrests. Detective Langford sat in her office one night, long after dark, staring at the board of evidence. No new leads. No suspects. No closure. She looked at the photograph of Emily Harper. Her warm eyes. Her smile. 14 stab wounds. 8 to the dog. Langford closed her notebook. This isn't over, she whispered to herself. One Thursday evening. Daniel had just returned from work. The days had become mechanical: sign in, sit, type, nod, leave. Home was no longer a place of comfort. It was a haunted shell. He dropped his bag on the couch and sank into the armchair. The house, though clean, still felt broken, as if grief was stitched into the walls. He stared blankly ahead, the silence almost taunting. And then, a flicker of memory. A garden. A voice. Daniel sat up suddenly. The parrot. He rushed to the master bedroom, the one he hadn't stepped into alone since that night. He pushed the door open slowly. There was the double glass doors that led out to the small, private veranda, Emily's favorite corner. A peaceful patch of green and stone, vines wrapped around a trellis, soft light spilling through the frosted garden lamps. And in the corner of the veranda, half hidden under the overhang, the cage. Empty, but not abandoned. The swing inside still moved slightly, as if it had been used recently. That's when Daniel's chest tightened. Cleo. That was her name. Cleo, the emerald green, sharp-eyed African parrot that Emily adored. Emily had spent hours with her. She talked to Cleo like she would a friend. She trained her, praised her, played music for her. And Cleo responded, mimicry, yes, but more than that. Cleo was smart. She knew names. She called out to people passing by the house. Neighbors. Mailmen. Friends. She could recognize faces and tones. Max treated her like a sibling, protective and watchful. And Emily? Emily loved Cleo like her third child. Daniel stepped onto the veranda, looking around. The cage was clean. Recently cleaned. And then, a rustle in the vines. Cleo. A flash of feathers, and a familiar shrill voice called out from the bushes near the trellis. Daniel, Emily. Cleo hopped into view, blinking innocently from a low branch. Daniel reached up gently and let Cleo hop onto his forearm. She was lighter than he remembered. Still beautiful, feathers a shimmer of blue and green, with bright, intelligent eyes that blinked at him slowly. He sat down on the edge of the veranda step, Cleo perched quietly now on his shoulder, nuzzling against his ear the way she always used to with Emily. He stroked her soft feathers, heart aching. "I'm sorry, girl," he whispered. "I should have remembered you sooner." The wind was cool that evening. The trees swayed gently, and a single chime rang somewhere in the garden. Cleo chirped, then said softly, "Daniel, Emily." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at her. "Cleo, were you here that night?" She tilted her head. He smiled faintly through the pain. "Did you see anything, girl? Can you tell me what happened?" Cleo blinked, hopped once on his shoulder. "Daniel, Emily." Then silence. He waited, his breath shallow, afraid to even blink in case she said something more. But she only chirped, puffed her feathers, and looked toward the house. Daniel sighed, both comforted and unsettled. It was Cleo's way of talking to him, sure, but it was also her echo of that night. She had heard something, seen something. Daniel stood, gently placing her on the swing inside her cage. As he locked it, she looked up at him once more and her eyes said she knew it all. Just stared at the little bird, heart now pounding like thunder in his ears. She turned in a slow circle on her perch, fluffed up again, and went quiet. Daniel stood still in the silence of the garden, and for the first time in weeks. He wasn't just grieving. It came back to Daniel all at once, the memory sharp and uninvited, like a thorn in his chest. The day of the funeral. It had been cold and gray, the clouds hanging low over the Harper home. Friends, relatives, neighbors, the house was full, but the silence in everyone's eyes told the truth. No one knew what to say. Emily's coffin had been placed in the living room, the very room that had once held birthday cakes, piano music, and laughter. Now it held a silence so heavy, it felt like the walls were grieving too. The pastor spoke gently, his voice carrying over the quiet sobs. Lily stood between Grace and Daniel, her small hand gripping his coat sleeve. Noah sat beside Tom Bennett, his eyes red from days of weeping, but dry now, too dry for a boy his age. And then, Noah had whispered something, tugging on Daniel's sleeve. Cleo should say goodbye too. Mom would want that. Daniel had nodded, throat tight, and stepped into the veranda. He brought the cage gently into the living room, placing it near the base of the coffin. Everyone turned quietly as Cleo was wheeled in. She sat perfectly still on her perch, unusually calm, no chirping, no name-calling. Just silent. Her round, dark eyes stared at Emily's still form inside the coffin. And then she screamed. A high-pitched, panicked screech. Over and over. Wings flapping violently inside the cage. Gasps echoed through the room. People turned, startled. Cleo was thrashing. Not random fluttering, but the kind of terror you can't fake. She clawed at the bars, eyes darting toward the guests. She screeched again, piercing, helpless. Hush. Cleo, shoo, it's okay, I will take you back. It's okay, I know. Daniel tried to calm her down. Daniel had to carry her back, hands shaking. She was set down in the veranda outside the master bedroom, and only then did she calm. Back in the present, Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, gripping the sheets tightly. He whispered aloud. Why did you scream that day, Cleo? She had seen something. Someone. Out of the dozens of mourners, someone had stepped in front of her, and she had remembered. Not with her mind, but with pure instinct, terror. Did she recognize the killer? Was she afraid they'd come again? Could she identify them? Daniel's heart raced. How to make her speak, identify. What to do? And more urgently, was the killer someone who stood right there, mourning alongside them? That night, Daniel sat on the floor of the master bedroom, Cleo's cage in front of him. The room was quiet. The kids were asleep. The house, as always now, was still, except for the occasional rustle of wind against the garden vines. Cleo sat calmly on her perch, blinking at him. Daniel opened a small notebook. He had written down every single person who had attended Emily's funeral, friends, neighbors, co-workers, distant cousins, even the florist. He started from the top. Softly he said, Grace. Grace Bennett. Cleo turned her head slightly. Said nothing. Grace. Grace. Still nothing. She occasionally chirped. That was all. He went on. Detective Langford. Pastor Jones. Lily's music teacher. Mr. Cook. Cleo just bobbed her head or blinked, calm as ever. Daniel sighed. You know these names, don't you? Emily taught you. That's when Cleo chirped sweetly. Hi, Pastor. Play piano, Mr. Cook. Daniel chuckled and then felt his heart sink. She was just repeating names she'd already learned. It wasn't recognition. It was memory. This was a dead end. He closed the notebook and leaned his head back against the bed. This isn't going to work, he muttered. You're an eyewitness, Cleo. But I don't speak your language. Cleo was silent. Daniel stood up slowly. He had been going about it wrong. Parrots don't answer questions. But they react to patterns. Sounds. Emotions. Daniel didn't need Cleo to confirm a name. Trigger a memory. And he knew where he had to start. The house was quiet, save for the soft creaking of the old floorboards and the rustling wind against the glass. Daniel sat cross-legged on the carpet of the master bedroom, the funeral photo album resting on his lap. He opened Cleo's cage door gently. She didn't fly out. Instead, she climbed down to the open floor, then hopped closer to him, curious. Almost like she knew something important was about to unfold. Come on, girl, Daniel whispered. Let's look together. He opened the first page. Photos from the morning, floral arrangements, the living room draped in white linen, Emily's portrait placed beside her casket. Cleo blinked. Nothing. He flipped slowly, one page at a time. Candids of guests, hands on shoulders, hugs, grief held tightly in family frames. Still nothing. A shrill scream. Cleo suddenly flapped her wings violently, knocking over the edge of the album. Screeching. Panicked. Just like she had on the day of the funeral. Daniel's heart leapt. He held still, then whispered, It's here, isn't it? Cleo flew up onto the armrest of the chair behind him, still flapping, distressed. Daniel slowly turned the pages back, one by one, until Cleo went completely still. Her eyes locked on the album. Breathing fast. Pupils wide. Daniel looked down. 3 pages. All group photos. Emily's cousins. Some old colleagues. A few blurry guests in the background. No labels. No names. His fingers shook as he hovered over the page. "Which one?" he whispered. Cleo let out a low growl-like noise, something she rarely did, and stepped backward, eyes locked on the photo. Daniel stared at the page. It could be any of them. 7, maybe 8 faces. All smiling. All mourning. All dressed in black. And one of them had killed his wife. He knew it now, because Cleo remembered. But Daniel faced a new nightmare. How do you identify a murderer in a group photo, when no one's pointing a finger, and your only witness is a bird? The pages lay still beneath Daniel's trembling hands. Cleo's breathing was ragged now, feathers fluffed in distress, eyes wide. And then, "Eddie." It was soft. Almost a whisper from Cleo. Daniel blinked. His head snapped toward her. "What did you say?" Cleo twitched her wings and repeated, a little louder. "Eddie." Daniel's heart sank. Daniel asked, "Eddie?" Cleo shifted suddenly and began screeching. "Eddie! Eddie! Bad boy! Eddie! Eddie! Bad boy!" She flew around the room in a wild frenzy, knocking into a lamp, circling overhead, then landing back on the bed, wings heaving. Daniel reached out, gently cradled her in his hands. "Shoo! Cleo, I've got you. It's okay. It's okay." Tears filled his eyes. He held her close, stroking her feathers, whispering, "You remembered. You've been trying to tell me all along." Cleo laid her head into his palm, too exhausted to chirp. Daniel whispered, brokenly, "Thank you, Cleo. Thank you." Outside, the wind howled through the garden trees. And inside, Daniel sat in the quiet shadows of the room, clutching the one soul who had seen it all. Now he had a name. And now he needed to find out why. Daniel sat by the fireplace, the flames barely flickering in the cold morning hush. His mind raced with images, memories, not of a stranger, but of Eddie. Eddie Bob. His cousin's boy. 18. Maybe 19. Quiet. Reserved. A little rough around the edges, but always polite when he was around Emily. Around the kids. He had always called Daniel and Emily uncle and auntie, though they weren't, technically. Daniel closed his eyes and saw the scenes unfold in his head. Emily setting a plate for Eddie at dinner, giving him extra helpings. Eddie laughing with Noah and Lily in the backyard, tossing a football. Eddie sitting on the floor, Max resting his head on his lap, Cleo hopping onto his shoulder. They had taken him in out of guilt that their life was peaceful, privileged, while Bob, Daniel's cousin, drank himself into debt and neglect. His wife gone. His house crumbling. His children barely surviving. And Eddie, the eldest, was drifting. Dropped out of school. Word in the family was that he'd been caught picking up drugs. No direction. No future. Emily always said, "At least here he's safe. He needs warmth, Daniel. Someplace to breathe." And she had meant it. Eddie became part of the household furniture. He came and went. Ate meals. Slept over sometimes when the kids begged for him to stay. He had full access. He knew the alarm codes. The safe. The layout. He knew Max. He knew Cleo. He knew them all. Daniel's eyes narrowed. If anyone could have walked in through the front door, if anyone could have done all this without forcing an entry, it was Eddie. He thought back to the group photo. Eddie had been there, standing at the edge, wearing a borrowed black blazer. Quiet. Expression unreadable. And then he remembered Cleo's screech. "Eddie! Bad boy!" Daniel's heart twisted. He needed to inform the police. Detective Sarah Langford sat across the polished steel table, arms folded, brows furrowed with curiosity more than concern. Daniel, visibly exhausted but driven by something deeper, grief laced with conviction, leaned forward. "You said," he began, "if I ever got a lead, anything at all, to come to you." Sarah nodded. "Of course. What do you have?" He took a breath. The words felt ridiculous even in his own mouth. But he had to say them. Eddie Bob. Bob's son. Linda blinked. "Your cousin's boy? The teenager who stayed with you sometimes?" "Yes," Daniel said. He knew the house. He knew Max knew Cleo. He knew everything. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's a strong accusation, Daniel. What makes you say this now? Daniel hesitated, swallowed hard. Then quietly said, Cleo told me. Sarah stared at him. There was a pause. Then she laughed. A soft, puzzled laugh at first, and then a glance to her partner standing by the door. Wait, you're saying the parrot told you? Daniel sat up straighter, voice firmer. Yes. She repeated his name. Not once. Several times. Panicked. Screeching. She recognized him from the funeral photo. Linda leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms again, this time tighter. Daniel, she said gently, like one speaks to someone slipping into delusion, you know parrots repeat words they're taught, right? They mimic. She wasn't mimicking, Daniel snapped. She was reacting. And she hadn't said his name since that day. Not once. Until that photo. Her partner chuckled from the door. But Daniel ignored him. I want you to run his background. I want him questioned. I want you to at least try. Linda exhaled, still skeptical, but now sensing Daniel's resolve wasn't based on fantasy. He wasn't broken, he was focused. Okay, she said finally. You check it out. Thoroughly, Daniel insisted. I'm not saying charge him. Just don't dismiss this. Sarah nodded. Fine. We'll dig into Eddie Bob. As Daniel stood to leave, he turned and added, I don't care if you laugh. I don't care if you think I've lost it. That bird, she saw something. And she remembers. Sarah watched him walk out of the room. Her smirk faded. There was something in his voice. And sometimes, a hunch, even a wild one, was worth following. The interrogation room was heavy with silence. Detective Sarah Halston leaned forward, her tone deceptively soft, eyes never leaving Eddie Monroe. A seasoned interrogator, she'd seen the signs before, the twitch in the jaw, the trembling knee, the darting glance to the mirrored wall. Eddie was cracking. At first, he resisted everything. I wasn't even in town that day. I don't know anything. I didn't see her in months. But Sarah knew. She always knew. And then she saw it, the dog bite wounds on Eddie's forearm. Red, raw, healing poorly. You say you weren't near the Harper's house, but those wounds, she said gently, they look like Max's signature. That dog never bit strangers. But he'd attack if something felt off. Like someone he used to trust. Eddie's face went blank. His silence stretched long. Then quietly his resolve broke. I knew the Harpers, he said, voice distant, like he was watching it all unfold from above. I knew them better than most of their own family. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I spent more time in that house than I did in my own. Emily, she felt sorry for me. Daniel too, but Emily more. They always had me over. Football games. Dinners. I'd help around the yard sometimes. They treated me like I belonged. He paused. His eyes narrowed. And that's the problem. I didn't belong. Not really. I'd go back to my place, peeling paint, empty fridge, my drunk father yelling into the walls. They had chandeliers. 2 ovens. Even their garage had heating. He laughed bitterly. That day, the day it started, I had come to watch the game with Noah. Emily was upstairs trying on jewelry for the wedding. She came down, changed her mind about something, and I followed her back up to grab a soda from the mini fridge in their master suite. He looked Sarah in the eye. She had them all laid out. On the bed. Necklaces, earrings, bangles, rings. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds. You could smell money in that room. She was holding them against different dresses, asking Lily which one matched best. He exhaled slowly. I stood in that room and I couldn't stop looking. Just looking. They had millions lying on that bed. Casual. Like candy. Like it was normal. Sarah didn't interrupt. She let the silence pull more truth from him. That night, I went back home, sat in the dark with half a beer and no electricity. And it just kept playing in my head. Over and over. That bed full of stones. And Emily laughing. And me, nothing. A beat passed. That's when I thought, if they don't even notice what they have, what's the harm if I take a little of it? They'll be gone for the wedding. All of them. Except the old man. And he's barely there. His fingers tapped the metal table nervously. A few nights later, I met Christy at Riley's, the bar downtown. We had a few drinks. I told him about the house, about the jewels, the timing, the layout. I said, it could be a clean job. No mess. In and out. Sarah's voice was cool. And Christy? What did he say? Eddie smirked faintly. He said, show me the blueprint. So I drew it on a napkin. His words began to spill faster now, as if confessing was a release. I told him I knew the codes. Security's easy to bypass. Max wouldn't attack me. I even knew where they kept the backup key. Christy said we'd wear gloves, masks. No prints. I said we'd go in just after sunset the night they left. He went quiet for a moment. It was supposed to be easy. Sarah scribbled something slowly in her notebook, then looked up. But it wasn't, was it? Eddie didn't answer. His silence said it all. The December day had a cruel chill in the air. The wind cut through the quiet lanes of Willow Creek Heights like razors. It was the kind of cold that made even well-insulated windows groan. Inside the Harper home, all was calm and still. But not all had gone as planned. Unknown to the family, two silhouettes on a black motorcycle cut through the mist and pulled up near the Harper's back gate around 2:30 p.m. Eddie Bob and his accomplice, Christy Raines. Both wearing heavy jackets, gloves, and balaclavas. The plan was simple, in and out before sunset. No witnesses. No complications. But nothing ever goes as planned. Eddie punched in the alarm code. It beeped and the door clicked open. They stepped inside, silent as shadows. Eddie moved swiftly, heading toward the wall panel near the bookshelf, fumbling with the security disarm code. That's when they heard it. A growl. A low, menacing growl. The German shepherd stood at the end of the hall. His ears were forward, tail stiff. He hadn't barked. Not yet. Eddie took a soft step forward, forcing calm into his voice. Hey Max. It's me, buddy. Max paused, then wagged his tail once. Recognition flickered. But then, he saw Christy. A stranger. Wrong energy. With a sudden, violent bark, Max lunged. Christy screamed, more from surprise than fear, and stumbled back. But Max was already airborne. The weight of the dog hit Christy in the chest. Teeth tore through the sleeve of his coat and into the flesh beneath. Eddie intervened and got bit by Max. Panicking, Christy reached into his belt, pulled a hunting knife, and stabbed. Twice. And again. Max let out a strangled yelp as he dropped to the floor, bleeding out. Eddie murmured to Christy, Hey, why did you bring a knife? That's when they heard it. Max? What happened, boy? A voice. Emily. She stood frozen at the entrance to the hallway, her mouth parted in horror. She had not gone to the wedding. No one had known. Maybe she missed the flight. Maybe she stayed back for a reason only she knew. But now, she had walked straight into death. Emily turned and bolted toward the master bedroom, stumbling over a fallen chair, knocking over a lamp. She screamed for help. Screamed Daniel's name. Screamed for her children. Eddie caught up to her near the hallway and slapped her hard across the face, spinning her off balance. Stay down, he shouted, breath frantic. But Emily was a fighter. She grabbed a vase and threw it at him. Grabbed another. The struggle moved into the bedroom, crashing against furniture, slamming into walls. Christy was already halfway down the hall. That's when he heard a second voice. The old man. Walter Harper, shouting from his room. Calling out for help. Emily! Who's there? Christy ran in a fury. He stormed into the bedroom, grabbed the porcelain lamp from the bedside table, and struck Walter across the head. One blow. Walter collapsed back into the pillows. Motionless. Breathing but barely. Christy shut the door behind him. And now there was blood. Too much blood. Max's body. Emily's screams. Walter's blood on his sleeves. This wasn't a robbery anymore. This was murder. Emily's instincts kicked in. She needed her phone, anything to call for help. With blood in her mouth and panic flooding her veins, she made a sudden lunge toward the master bedroom. She knew her phone was somewhere near the dresser. Maybe she could lock herself inside. Maybe dial Daniel. Maybe dial 911. But Eddie and Christy were right behind her. They crashed into the room. Eddie grabbed her wrist. Christy slammed the door shut behind them. "Don't make this worse, Emily," Eddie panted. "We'll just take what we need and leave. Don't fight." But Emily was not someone who gave up. She clawed at Eddie's face, dug her nails into his skin, and in the heat of the struggle, ripped off his mask. For a moment, time froze. Their eyes met. Hers, wide with betrayal. His, filled with shame. "Eddie," she gasped. "Eddie. You." Christy's eyes went cold. And just like that, he drew the knife again, rage in his grip. "No!" Eddie shouted. "Don't." But Christy was already stabbing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Over and over again. Emily's screams filled the room and then faded into gurgles, and then silence. Blood seeped into the carpet, onto the wedding invitations still lying on the dresser, onto the silk scarf Emily had been trying to match her dress with the day Eddie visited. Eddie collapsed near her, trembling, staring at what they'd done. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he whispered. Christy wiped the blade, cold and detached. "Take what we came for. Get the money. The jewels. We're leaving." The safe was broken into. The drawers ransacked. The diamonds, the emerald necklace, the pearl set Daniel had gifted Emily on their anniversary, all gone. And then they fled. Through the hallways smeared with muddy footprints and blood. Through the front door, which Emily had once left open for Eddie without a second thought. They disappeared into the December wind. But they didn't know. They had missed someone. A witness. Silent. Still. Watching from the shadows of the vine-draped veranda near the master bedroom. Inside her golden cage, Cleo had seen it all. Her little black eyes blinked slowly. She had seen Eddie. And she would never forget. Detective Sarah, relentless and sharp, followed the lead Daniel had risked everything to give. Cleo's cry had set a wheel in motion. Using Eddie's confession, Sarah tracked down Christy, who was hiding out in a rundown apartment 2 towns away. The stolen jewels already sold, the money almost gone. After hours of interrogation and pressure, Christy cracked. The confession was brutal. The timeline, the entry, the killing of Max, the chaos, and the merciless stabbing of Emily. He described it all, even laughed at parts, confirming every gory detail Eddie had shared. Sarah collected every bit of circumstantial evidence, Eddie's wounds from Max's bite, the pawnshop receipts, security footage from the gas station nearby that caught them speeding off, and most hauntingly, Cleo's repeated calling of Eddie's name in front of police officers. The district attorney was stunned by the clarity of the case. Court proceedings began within weeks. The courtroom was packed. The media was all over it, calling it the Parrot that solved a murder. Cleo, though small and caged, was center stage. During her statement, Detective Sarah turned to the judge and said, "If not for this bird, who saw what no one else could, we wouldn't be here today. She may not have hands, but she pointed us to the killer. That's more than most witnesses do." The courtroom went silent. Then gasps. Then murmurs. The judge looked at Cleo perched quietly beside Daniel. She blinked, calm but forever changed. Eddie and Christy were both found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and armed burglary. Both were sentenced to life without parole. Justice had been served. Cleo was hailed a national sensation, TV interviews, magazine covers, fan pages. But none of it mattered to Daniel. Not to Noah. Not to Lily. And not to Cleo. They had lost Emily. They had lost the soul of their home. Some wounds no verdict could heal.